Yeah, hi everyone. So I already told Thomas it's the hardest spot that I have because it's after lunch break, so everyone is like dying, digesting their food. I'm also not at 100% of energy level as I usually am this week, so I think we're gonna fit quite well together today. So, and yeah, I liked the talks this morning very much because I think they had one thing in common. And this is basically go out there, do the work, apply it. The practical work itself is way more important than the theory. And this is also what I had to learn in my current role. So I've been the CPO at Ailylabs for 6 months. And I've scaled a lot of product teams in my career, right? I spent a lot of years at Zalando, and I scaled the entire mobile app product teams there, their membership team. I was at N26, and like all these companies are pretty big, and I went to hypergrowth many times. And you might think, oh, if you've been doing this for 10, 15 years, you basically know how it goes. And then obviously we all read the Marty Kagan books. But what I had to learn, the first thing I had to learn after a while, is we have to throw the Marty Kagan book out of the window because nothing like that works. Because we live in such a different world, and a lot of these theories that even work in traditional tech companies that have been very successful, they just do simply not apply anymore because we're now dealing with a new beast, with new technologies, and we have to adapt the way we work. And as Sebastian said it earlier, this requires a lot of humbleness because it's very easy to fall into the trap and say, hey, you know what? I've been doing this for like 15 years. I show you how to do it. It doesn't work because you really have to rethink, you have to observe, detect what works well and actually build up on that. But you also have to obviously detect what needs to be tweaked to set up the company that it actually can scale to a few hundred employees. So, and this is what I want to talk about. And actually, I will not bring you the, let's say, the silver bullet on how to do it. But I actually want to share like a little bit of war stories, like things we're actually discussing realistically, like on a day-to-day basis. I also brought a few guys from my team today, and you can actually check with them if what I tell you is real, and give them even advice on how to do it better. Because I think we're all in this together for the very first time. AI is a technology that's evolving massively fast. And I think no one knows how to do it, and that's why it's very important to actually apply something, not just read, but actually apply something, try stuff out, see if it works, if you're successful, if you can try impact, and otherwise tweak it and move on, but do something. Don't sit around and read the book and wait someone else actually to allow you to do so. All right, so when we now speak about a product, right? What do we even mean by the product? So I'll give you an example, right? When I used to work at Zalando, it was quite interesting culturally what we meant by product. Because if you would go to the fashion departments, like the buyers, the category managers, for them it's like, but why are you the product manager? We're buying the products. Because for them, the product was actually the Nike t-shirt that you see here. Versus we thought we're the product because we're basically building the digital frame. Through that, the product itself was sold. Now, with Zalando, right? I mean, you usually purchase or like there's kind of long buying cycles. Usually a few months ahead when you buy the inventory, like 1 or 2 seasons beforehand. So you basically know more or less like what will come into your app in terms of data, because there's these kind of long cycles and the predictability is quite good. You can actually plan ahead more or less what will come. So for example, when we launched beauty as a category, lipsticks, makeup, perfume, we had quite a long time to actually adjust the product and could plan it. So why I actually call that out, why this is important, is even in a Zalando, right? If you work in a perfect siloed waterfall, probably the quality not going to be overly great, but it does not have this like massive effect because still that's just due to the long buying cycles of physical products. So then at some point, after a few years of like e-commerce, I joined N26 and I took over their entire like consumer-facing parts of the apps. And there we usually suddenly had kind of a, at least it appears like that, a purely digital product, right? Because in the end you had like numbers coming in. I mean, theoretically there in the background there's something like a physical bank account or something like that, if you want to call it that way. And it has a very regulated component to it. But again, also here, when it comes to the data that comes into your app, it's somehow fairly plannable. You have a few edge cases, but then again, even though it's a purely physical product, purely a digital product, what comes in your app in terms of content and data is still fairly observable. But now, I actually work at Ailey. And as Thomas actually summed it up quite nicely, in the end, what we're doing, we're a little bit your digital management consultant, right? We actually plug into your data, go through it, we analyze it, interpret it, and then we actually try to detect some insights. And as the McKinsey consultant would provide you these insights in like 5 bullet points at the end of the slide deck. That's what we do. Oh, sorry. But we also give you, obviously, predictions, forecasts. It's not rocket science anymore these days. And then at the end, now also we use agents. So in the end, we basically give you the insights in real time on a daily basis. So you don't need to have the army of McKinseys or BCGs coming in. You don't have to pay them like a 6-digit amount for, I don't know, 2-3 weeks of work. And you have it in real time at your fingertips. The problem with our product is that on the one side, we have AI as a technology and like all the models and the systems that are constantly evolving. Whereas at the same time, the data from large corporates, and we work with corporates like, for example, Sanofi, a huge pharma enterprise, and that's kind of the scale we're dealing with, like Fortune 500 companies. And all of their data doesn't necessarily come in a super structured manner, because that's also something that's important for us. We want to be business ready. We want to integrate our B2B solution within one day. And therefore, obviously, we have the challenge, or the ambition, let's put it that way, to also be able to deal with unstructured data. But it also means that whatever comes into our app that we have to deal with is absolutely unpredictable. And that's why I said, when I joined the company, the first few days you observe, and then you think, I know how to fix this, because I've done it many times, and all the rules that usually apply in like scaling teams, I just apply it here and fix the tech side of things. But that's something I learned after 3-4 weeks. It doesn't work here. Because fundamentally, the nature of AI and the nature of our product, the nature of data, does not allow to just take the school book and even the experience to a certain degree and just apply it. And that forced me as well to actually go a little bit in a mode of like also observing what's going on here, observing what are actually the mistakes, and then go in and like try to find tweaks that will help us to multiply and to scale. And I think it's a little bit like with regulation. I was myself a CEO of a fintech, and in regulation it's the same thing, because we did blockchain-based financial products. It was always the question, how will it be regulated? But before you can actually regulate something, you need some usage. And I think the same thing can be applied now if we actually want to, if we scale product teams in companies that apply AI, or actually have AI at its core as we do. You need to observe a while, see how things are going, see what are potential mistakes that you can come in and even create some rules in order to scale. And this is frankly where we are right now. And that's why I'm saying I'm not giving you the final rule book that you can take, but I want to share rather some challenges and how we're thinking about that. And if someone has a smart advice, we're always happy to listen. All right, I'll give you a super quick intro of what our product is so you understand a bit why we have certain challenges. So as I said, our product first started, we look into the financial department, the R&D department, the manufacturing supply side of things, go-to-market and commercial, and even the people or HR department. And what we then do as a first level is basically predictions and insights. We take the data and we replace the manual forecasts with AI. On top of that, we have a CI platform that stands for competitive intelligence. So we're constantly screening the market and, for example, provide information that, hey, there's a competitor on the pharma side and they're actually faster in terms of studies. So you have to speed up your studies, otherwise your competitor launches first. And that's the worst case scenario in pharma. But then obviously we try to, it depends a little bit on the department you're in, but we're screening the market and provide you external data. And then based on that, we give you the business recommendations, as you can imagine it, like the 5 bullet points at the end of a McKinsey deck. So forecast, predictions, all of that, no rocket science. The thing is, the rocket science comes with the AI accuracy. Providing forecasts and insights at an 80% level is not a rocket science. Doing that at 98% is rocket science. And this is only why you need long-term partners that understand that building up AI capabilities, you do that in the long term. So that also means that the typical VC approach, oh, I come in within seven years, I want my money back, might not necessarily work that way. And that's also the reason why, for example, for a very long period of time, like our company was bootstrapped, and like keeping this profitability window for us is very important. The second level is that we now basically have the data across the different departments, but our competitive advantage is we're not just a finance forecasting tool. What we can do is we analyze your data on the HR side, and we can correlate how it impacts your financial performance. And this is now actually where the secret sauce comes a bit in. As we have access to data across the different departments, we can correlate them, connect the dots, and provide additional insights. And also detecting some patterns. I earlier made the joke, what basically Bob does in his like manual work, like a little bit different, we actually try to do through AI, and it's always detecting patterns and connecting the dots. We do it on a quantitative level, where he does it obviously on a qualitative level. On level 3, though, it's now really moving away from a user needs to go in the app and detect those insights himself. We have proactive agents now running in the background, detect like constantly going through internal, external data and looking for optimization potential. So this is kind of fairly new because this year is the year of agentive AI. So we've launched 6 agents now, from launching, which basically a launches agent which combines the data from finance to R&D to manufacturing to commercial. But then also, for example, we have very specialized agents, for example, improving and optimizing the ClinOps department within pharma. So in the end, it's always about perceiving the internal and external environment. But again, as I also now told you already, just dealing with the internal data of a client that has, I don't know, 50 to 80,000 employees is quite significant, right? But then adding the external data on top just increases the complexity exponentially all the time. All right. Then let's start. What is actually this difference that I keep talking about between, let's say, AI-driven product or even an AI company at heart versus a traditional tech company? And isn't it even funny that it's 2024 and we already said, oh, the traditional tech companies, so last summer, what they're doing is like pretty old school. I can remember when I started to work in the mobile app scene that is not too long ago, actually, and we already now think how they work, all these innovative approaches, might not necessarily work the same way anymore. So this is, as we look back in the days to basically traditional corporates. And I think just this fact alone should force us into a bit of a humbleness. So as I said before, AI systems itself, the models we're using, for example, they're constantly evolving. So the AI basically as a system itself is very unpredictable, but at the same time, they like develop at like laser speed. Versus, as I said, like the systems we use in the Zalando, for example, they're way more predictable because just the planning cycles are working slightly different. The second part is, as I mentioned before, is the data sensitivity. I mean, we had now several cases where we actually tried to work out what's the design approach, right? Our designers like sitting with the PMs, and even if you apply the whole user needs, user interviews thing and so on, there's a point where you come up with a kind of your design approach and you want to get ready for the development. And then usually the developers say, oh, but how does the design look like? I need a Figma file. And before the Figma file is not ready, no one wants to code. Exaggerating, but you know what I mean. At least you want to prepare a little bit for the development, and that's quite important, right? Because this war room, sitting at the table kind of approach usually works well if you're like a 10-people startup, but for whatever reason, it does not work if you're like 350 people. So at some point, you try to introduce a certain process which somehow guides you through that you can actually scale your practices across the org that is scaling. But then now, we actually come up with an approach, and even if you usability test it, what you usually do is you usability test it with synthetic data. But then what often happens is when all the streams are coming together, and you see that maybe, especially with external data, you don't have as many data points as you would like to have. Suddenly, the entire visual approach does not work anymore, and you have to go back to the drawing board and like come up with different solutions. And this is what I mean by data sensitivity, that it's really hard to plan how your data will in the end look like. And last but not least, normally, I know like the feature factory is a term, it's like the horror movie of product management, if you wish. But still, in the other side, like usually when we think about solution, we often think in terms of, how can we actually approach this user problem? And the end result often tends to be somehow a feature approach. And we often have to debate, where does the innovation even come from? Does it even come still from product UX and tech? Or does it come from AI? Does it come from the data itself? Does it come from the models? And can we even detect innovation from there? So the way how we actually approach product, and you cannot see AI just as another tech function, so to say, and just involve them in the delivery cycle, because there might be the ones that actually do the discovery at a quantitative level. And therefore, this whole focus, how you think about product management from discovery to design, define, deliver, maybe does not work in that sense anymore, or different roles are actually taking the lead within the different phases. All right, I want to give you, as we now want to speak about how you scale teams, I want to give you an overview and a very big challenge that we actually just discussed yesterday in our product and design offsite is, at the moment, we have one structure which we call our business domains. So we have basically product teams that are structured based on finance, on R&D, manufacturing and supply, go-to-market, and people, which is basically replicating the HR department. The reason why that is, we're serving large enterprises, and large enterprises normally structure their value chain along that. And that's why we also thought, hey, when we provide solution for different departments, maybe it's a good structure to also have teams based on those value chains, so we can drive innovation on that level. So basically, if you open the app, you enter those departments, you will see the predictions and forecasts, summaries, analysis and insights, charts, tables, and some features like scenario planners. On top of that, we have overarching product teams. So these are basically, we have a correlator feature that normally then goes in and tries to detect patterns between finance and people, or finance and manufacturing. So really correlating the data and building a homepage around this cross-functional view. We have a personalization and engagement team. Obviously, personalization shouldn't be thought in the business domain, but overarching. And also like how we drive retention, engagement, and onboarding would be happening in this team. And then, as I said, now we're actually focusing more on agentive AI. So there's a team that has built a framework to serve all the business domains through agentive AI. So, as I said, this is like overarching AI innovation. Whatever we do has an AI component in it, otherwise we wouldn't touch it. Now, we actually are increasing the team size. So how should we further increase? Now you could argue, well, this whole business domain approach doesn't make sense. It's not efficient, because coming from the traditional tech world, what you would do is you would try to have more an overarching approach and then serve all the different business domains. That was the first thing that would come to your mind, how you actually scale a tech org. The problem is that at the moment, an AI product requires a lot of business domain knowledge. So what we cannot afford is to have like someone working and building financial products for a CFO who does not understand the finance department. The same goes for manufacturing. And now you could even argue, as a good product manager, you should be able to ask good questions, because that will bring you there. And that's also true to a certain degree, but at some point, in order to really understand how you can solve products better through AI, it takes a very long time to gain this business domain knowledge. So therefore, for us, it's very important that we have this in the vertical teams. However, this first approach is actually very, very costly. And what happens, even though we have a design system and theoretically can actually scale at a systemic level, theoretically we have all the tools. But then the human factor comes in, and the reinventing the wheel in terms of features, approaches, and so on, even though we have a design system, constantly works. And plus, it's just very costly. However, you do have the business domain knowledge that, as I said, if you work in a Zalando, I can build an app And that same app works for clothes, for shoes, for beauty, for different categories. I don't need the domain knowledge. I can work around it because, again, it's way more plannable how the data will be provided, what is the content. It's going to be a picture, and it's going to be a bit of text. And yes, maybe a lipstick has 150 colors versus jeans and clothes rather has 10. There's slight differences, but they're not as fundamental than comparing a manufacturing and like production site domain knowledge with a financial department versus an HR department. So there is an advantage for it, but it's a very costly phenomenon, and it makes us very inefficient as a company, because when we build a new table, in tendency, we try to build a new table instead of reusing existing components. The second thing is that now you could actually argue, okay, but then why don't you just take the overarching teams? We tried that approach as well, and it's actually very, very hard for these teams to gain the business knowledge. And if you do not get the deep business domain knowledge into building a framework, then that also doesn't work. So is there a silver bullet for solving that? In the end, you can only solve it through the way how you work and how you approach your work. Because there is no right or wrong, and you could probably find a lot of reasoning for one or the other approach. But what I can tell you is, coming from a traditional tech org and like applying these things that would work for a product like a Zalando or even a fintech, they fundamentally do not work anymore, because AI products require this deep business domain knowledge, because your data is in the end your product. So when we have a typical team setup that we're having, that's why we always have a product manager, but often we even have a business impact lead on top, which comes from a certain domain, which is a former CFO, for example, that helps us and the finance teams to actually really being able to work with executives on a top level on a Fortune 500 enterprise. Then we have the classical roles like a UX person, and then is probably the most crucial person in this domain team is our principal AI. And the principal AI is a function, it's basically a data scientist, but these people have, interestingly, the same qualities as a product manager often, because they also interviewing the user, because they are the product, basically. So they're also often interviewing the users, so we also try to actually take some qualitative and quantitative approaches in, because they have to support us on the product side to have these kind of conversations on a deep data level. And this is quite a helpful role, because in the end, we're creating the product ourselves, by getting the data, getting the right data, working with it, and bringing it into a format we can even work with, and then even create the value on top of it. Then we have data engineers, and also like data engineers in this game are probably the most important parts of the tech team. I would even go that far to say they're more important than the front-end people, and back-end people we don't even have so much, because we actually try to avoid back-end in total, but just having a back-end as an API. So what actually skills do you now need if you work in an AI product team? I mean, you need all the skills that we learned this morning, right? You need to understand your user, and as also Bob said, you need to go out and speak to them and learn and observe them. Actually talk to them, just have a conversation. That's a good start. Yesterday we had our product offsite, and that was quite funny, because a lot of time our people are in calls with clients. And they're complaining, again, the calendar phenomenon, and said, oh, but I'm actually so busy with client meetings. And now we actually agreed to it. You know what? This is fantastic. That means every week you already have user interview sessions scheduled in your calendar already. That's amazing. It's a question like, how do you look into your calendar? How can you reuse your meeting and make maybe a client meeting a user interview session that you can have even scheduled on a weekly basis? I think it's the way how you approach your work differently. So, but obviously, as a domain, if you work in an AI product, you really, really need to understand like your domain deeply. And also, at the same time, you have to think way more in patterns and in systematic approaches to not become inefficient. So if you have in mind, right, if you work in the finance product team, you need to understand finance, but at the same time, whenever you build a new feature, think it not, oh, for this client, now in this use case, I can actually build something. Really try to actually abstract it and bring it on a higher level. How can we build it? Department agnostic, industry agnostic. Like, you always have to bring it to a higher level when you find in the solution, because otherwise your product will not scale and it becomes very, very inefficient. So the systematic thinking combined with deep domain knowledge, I think probably is required in a tech team as well, but it doesn't have this kind of like significant consequences if you do not have it. Because we often have data in the app, the QA person said, oh, we're done, but you look at it, you're like, no, but this data doesn't make sense. You need to have people that can look in the app and say, is this a good insight? Is this data good or not? And that's why it's not enough that data is in the app. It needs to be the correct data, and someone needs to be capable to detect those things. So on the UX side as well, we have tremendously great people on the UX side. But even for them, it's way more required that they understand business as well. Because what we cannot afford is that someone provides us with a graph or a chart, but does not understand how, I don't know, like people data does evolve over the years, or like how normally the data of a production side will evolve over the years. They need to get a good feeling over time for this kind of data in their specific business domain to be able to visualize the data correctly. So data visualization as a skill in the UX team is quite significant, so you're capable of thinking of edge cases. How do I deal with this data if it's like has 25 data points versus maybe just 2? And also we need to be comfortable with way more dynamic solutions, that we do not define the Figma to 100%, but that we're okay to stop at a 50%, give it a try, and then see how it goes, and be open to tweak it. So as I said, on the AI side, obviously these people, they are a little bit our heroes in the company. It was like back in the days, the software developer. Do you remember 15 years ago when we rolled a red carpet to the tech people? This is exactly what we're now doing to the AI people. And I'm really, when I actually interviewed for this position and I tried to figure out how the company operates, and this company was really challenging me for 2 months, where I really had a hard time to understand how they operate. But again, we have to operate significantly different than what we learned before. I tried to understand, and I sat with our founder, and I said, okay, but what does product do here? When I joined, there was no product management department, by the way. There was a business department, and there was a tech department, which had a business analyst. They were just focusing on the bureaucracy work of product, aka writing the Jira tickets. But I said, okay, but then who's actually detecting the opportunities, understanding the problems? And a lot of that work actually happened in the AI team. So in the end, we always make a little bit of joke, because if you would say AI is tech in our company, culturally not accepted. So, but I understand why, because these are people that combine technical skills, like they're data scientists, they have a very, very deep business understanding and a very, very high level of customer and user empathy. We have the data engineers, so they are basically, and now sorry, I have a bit of copy-paste mistake here in my slides. So we have our data engineers, and again, like these are, in the end, from the tech team, probably the most critical role to make sure that the data is coming in the correct format into the app and it's actually working, and we have the correct data. And then obviously we have tech, and I think this is something where we're currently changing, because back in the days we thought, oh, tech is only representing data, so it's just the frame, so it's not so important. It's like the last step, but this is something what we're currently like breaking up to really understand, yes, but we need to have also a technical stable environment that is highly flexible and can react to the different data coming in, where we currently also need to make a big step forward in working on a hyper-collaborative manner. All right, and I want to give you some examples now. When we understood the differences of the nature of the product, why scaling is not super straightforward and what is required in terms of the roles, I give you as an interesting challenge that you might know from traditional tech, but I think in the end, in data, the effects of not working cross-functionally are significant. So the other day, and I have actually one of my PMs here sitting in the first row, and yeah, we were actually working on a new agent we wanted to launch for one of our clients. And at some point, we had this moment that the team said, cool, we're done. So this is the exciting moment for us, because actually like we want to look in the app and see the first version and try it out and see how it goes. So basically what happened is the AI team is like, yeah, we're done, models working, data coming in correctly, perfect, amazing. Cool, then UX, anyways, they were done quite a while ago. And then tech said also, yeah, we're done. So basically super excited, opened the app, but there was nothing. So PM go on UAT, And for me, the UAT is not a QA, right? It normally is like you do the final look before you actually sign, like release it to your client. So the first question that we had was like, hey, I cannot see anything in the app. When everyone is done, why don't I see anything in the app? Then at some point we made it sure that we saw something in the app, because what actually happened is that AI in our company culturally is not part of the tech organization. They're an org on its own, because in the end they're the product, right? If you compare it to Zalando, it's like the categories or purchasing department that buys the shoes. In our case, it's the AI department getting the data from the client, work with it, and doing their magic with it. So they were done on their end. The data somehow did its magic, but we just didn't have access to it. The tech team itself, they said, well, we're done, because in the end the chart is implemented, so we're done. And then we asked, but okay, but how can we now make sure that the AI magic comes in the app and is visible and is correct? Well, no one felt responsible for it, because it's not my job, because I just think in my silo. This is where the problem comes from. And as I said before, in a normal traditional tech company, you have a tech lead or an EM that makes sure that on the delivery side, everything comes together. But now in our case, tech thinks basically in implementing the designs, but like who makes sure that in the end, like the data comes together all in the app? And in the end, it's shocking, but it's a true problem we had to solve, because it was very unclear who is in the end needs to make sure that all the different pieces come together. And but this is the reason, because normally you have a tech lead ensuring that this is happening, but as we do not see AI as tech, then it was very unclear. Now you could argue, is the PM responsible for that? Depends. If the DM is responsible for the delivery, I guess this is different and in different organizations. In the end, it's a matter of calling out responsibilities and the way how you want to work. In the end, it boils down to communication. But I think this problem only exists because AI is not seen as tech anymore, and this is something which is in the end then new. If you see it as your main product, then you also have to rethink the way how you define product management as a whole. Then the second part, so we finally at some point managed to actually have it, everything is available in the app. So we looked at it, and we actually looked at the QA and we said, hey, we would just want to do a final UAT. Are we sure this is the correct data? Because I'm pretty sure like a few zeros are missing here. But the QA person said, no, I tested everything, must be correct. But yeah, what does even quality mean? Is quality that the feature is stable and there's no bug? Does quality now mean that the design looks as I initially envisioned it? Does quality mean that, first of all, data is in the app? And secondly, that's the correct data? And third, who even has the capabilities to say that it's the correct data or not? So, and then once we agreed, might not be the correct data, tweaked it, had the right data in, but then suddenly we looked into it and we're like, you sure this is like Figma implemented correctly? I compared to my Figma and here it looks quite nice and here it looks, a bit weird. Well, what it turned out that we actually designed the Figma in kind of a little bit a Disney approach, and then the real data kicked in, and then suddenly it was theoretically still the right design approach, but it just didn't work anymore with the type of data that we received. So that's why if you actually build an AI product team, there's some key questions that you have to answer culturally in your org, and they seem so trivial. And I tell you, they seem trivial, and I'm with this company like for 6 months. But sometimes like it's the trivial things that you need to clarify, that you really, really make sure that you build your product at scale. Because now we already have quite a significant amount of users, and you cannot afford that these very trivial questions are not answered. So the first question I think we should answer is indeed, what is AI? And this is a cultural question, but it has an enormous effect if you don't define it and if you don't clarify ownership and responsibilities. And this is like, is AI tech? And if it's not tech, then who holds all the strings together? And it can be product, right? It's a matter of definition. But you have to actually discuss this in your round. How do you make sure that data enters your app, that the data is correct, and everything comes together, and what's your definition of done? So we heard earlier from Sebastian that these days we don't have a problem in delivery anymore. Well, I think we actually, I've been like building mobile apps for the past 15, 20 years, but I think now the very fundamental root questions come up again, because we're dealing now with a new way of product, a data and AI product. The second part is, who owns quality? We do have a QA team. We do have someone being responsible for quality. But the way how they currently think is, again, like a traditional tech product. They think about, oh, my app works, it doesn't have a bug, and the design is implemented, and the acceptance criteria is signed off. But now as data is coming in, and AI, in our case, is not part of the tech team, QA stops at the tech team. And this is not how you can think of quality in the long run. Now you could say, let's be pragmatic, we're PMs, we take it over. I think it's very, very dangerous if quality is owned by the product people, because then the entire delivery part is on your shoulders. And in most of our cases, we cannot even write a single line of code. And this is also a big problem. So also the quality definition is very important. And when we even talk quality, what do we now mean by quality? Do we, and I'm actually now excluding the entire user insights, do we even solve a customer problem part? I'm completely excluding this now from this conversation, because that's a different one. And, but in the end, if we're not talking about if there's, like, do we talk about if there's even data in the app? Or do we talk about if the data is correct? If it's accurate, like, who owns that? Or if there's a bug, that's often still included in the QA part. Or if the design later looks strange, and if this is something, if we want to represent the data in this respective manner to the user, and if it's even still intuitive. Because, hey, we usability tested our design, but well, now reality kicks in and maybe it's not intuitive anymore. So you completely have to rethink your QA approach. Again, you can define it as you wish, and I think there's no silver bullet either, but you have to have a conversation in your cross-functional teams how you as a team want to own it. Because otherwise, quality ends with a technical product, and that's not enough. And last but not least, also a very simple question like, who owns product end-to-end? And again, like when I joined and we introduced product management, it's like, oh, Kristina, you now own our product end-to-end. But the question is, in the end, as a product person, right, I need to get empathy with the user and make sure we're building the right things. But then ultimately, there's a lot of different disciplines and functions involved. And it cannot be on one person owning it end-to-end. It just fundamentally doesn't work. So you need to find rather a setup, a cross-functional collaboration. You need ownership from everyone who's in the team. And this is, again, rather a culture. If your culture is that you raise an army of executors, it will not scale. You need to basically create a culture of builders and creators where everyone feel intrinsically motivated to actually learn and build it. You need a lot of humble people that are really understand that we're currently pushing the boundaries, we're disrupting. What we're building is no one we can even ask. Marty Kagan will not answer those questions. In the end, we are doing that for the very first time, but we have to have the goal in mind to build a great product at a great quality. All right, so now I'm wondering if this talk is a little bit what Sebastian said earlier. For the past 30 minutes, I haven't told you anything new. And that's very true, right? I think there's a few key principles that are very important. But if you do not follow them, and as I told you, if you do not follow them for Zalando, if you work in a siloed waterfall, probably not a super great intuitive solution that will come out of it, but it somehow will not kill you. In our case, it will kill you. If you do not follow a cross-functional collaboration from the start, if we have now a cross-functional kickoff where we have design, tech, AI, a product, everyone at the table from the very first moment, in our inception, we first describe what is an R&D manager? What does they do in pharma? I don't have a pharma background. I need to learn all that stuff. And sometimes it's even good if you're not coming from pharma because you do not assume, you have to ask, you have a conversation. You need to understand how that world of this R&D manager looks like and what is he, basically, what is his goal? What is the impact he wants to achieve? What drives his bonus at the end of the year, right? Because if you understand these kind of things, these motivations, you then understand, that's why he actually has an intrinsic motivation to speed up his studies, because if he speeds up the studies, they get ahead of competition. Potentially, it will end up in his bonus later on because he's driven significant business impact. But it's not about the PM to need to know that. You need your tech person, your software developers, your principal AIs, your UX person. Everyone needs to constantly have this context that we can even stay flexible. The tech team needs to stay flexible. I work with a 50% of Figma, which is rather design approach. We see once the data kicks in, we'd rather have a weekly release, and once the data kicks in, we have a look again if this design approach even makes sense. So you need to cross-functionally work from the start, because otherwise you end up in a situation that the tech team develops something in a black box for 8 weeks, and then you look at it one day before you want to release something, and you figure out, doesn't make sense. Quick iterations are very, very important for that exact same reason, because you need to stay flexible and really see all the disciplines coming together, and maybe even the AI team after a while comes and says, hey, the model we used in the very beginning doesn't make sense. We have to rethink our approach entirely, and maybe even the solution will be different. That means UX and tech also need to rethink it. So you have to have quick iterations instead of long cycles, just because of the nature of AI and data. And last but not least, what we're doing is so innovative, right? If the tech team says they're done, and the QA person doesn't feel responsible in checking if the data can even be true or is even coming in the app, you have a cultural problem in your company, significantly. Always, but this effect is way, way, way more dangerous in an AI company, because based on the nature of data, highly dynamic, very unpredictable, data sensitivity, you need everyone to step in and like be hyper interested beyond their own role, because otherwise you cannot disrupt and you cannot react to the very fast-paced nature of a product. All right, so if you want to go into AI, which I highly recommend, it's crazy, it's craziness all the time. Everything is like very last minute, highly fast-paced and dynamic, very stressful, but also very rewarding, because we're now disrupting something very big. You have to be a strong system thinker and like have a deep domain knowledge at the same time. Last night I sat next to Bob at the dinner, and we discussed about like thinking in patterns and so on. And this is our daily bread. Like these kind of cognitive conversations, they can be sometimes very exhausting, but we have them all the time, because what works for one department in finance, you need to be able to translate it into manufacturing and supply, because otherwise your product doesn't scale. You need to really embrace like complex, ambiguous, open-ended problems where the solution is not straightforward. And it's very exhausting, because at some point we want to write the ticket and get it out of the door. That's not how AI product works. Also, as a leader, I often have people coming to me and say, oh, it's stressful, and like we do things in a rush, and da-da-da-da-da. But that's the nature of AI. It's a fast-paced technology that's constantly evolving. ChatGPT has become like a routine. It's changing our private customer behavior. And what we are doing is changing behavior, like consumer behavior, as you wish, within companies. So instead of fighting the uncertainty, we need to learn to live with it. In general in life, I think these days, I think the past 5 years showed us that nothing in our life is safe anymore. And the same goes for our product. That also means we have to stay highly flexible. And that's exhausting for our brain, because I think as human beings, we try to hold on something and seek for security. It's not working for those products. And this is something, if you want to work for an AI product, I think that's the first mindset shift you should try to get, because then it feels less exhausting if you just accept it. You need to be super results oriented and with with highly business impact focus, and super adaptive and experimental. And again, these things are not new to us, but they have a different effect if you do not apply them in AI. Cross-functional team player, again, if you don't do it, you're facing a lot of issues and you're building something that's indeed for the bin. All right, in the end, it's all about aligning, adapting, evolve. To sum it up, it's basically AI products, they have a different nature. Unpredictable, it's complex, requires hyper-agile work environments, and you cannot compare everything you learned in traditional tech and just apply it out of the box. You need to observe, see what from your toolbox works. 50% will not work, and you have to rethink it and stay open and humble and flexible, even though you're doing this stuff for 20 years. And I think we as leaders also, I really like this talk from Millie as well. It's about humbleness and like really constantly adapt. Learn also from your people and like grow together and establish your own practices. So you can basically now be the influencers of the next generation of technology products. Thank you very much.